get going. It's my pleasure to introduce Zachary Logan today. Zachary has gone through this program here at the U of S, and he's actually one of our great success stories, because I'll start reading you some of the list of places that Zach has been to recently and is slated for an exhibition in the near future. But he did both his MFA and his BFA previous to that here at the U of S. He's got oodles and oodles of shows on his CV here. Recently, he just came back from North Bay at the Line Gallery, a gallery that I hadn't heard of before, with an exhibition curated by Rhiannon Vogel. Rhiannon Vogel, is that pronouncing her name correctly? Yeah. Right, and she also curated a drawing show, and I think you've got a drawing in this show that's coming up at the Mendel, right, Allie? Yeah, so that opens up on this Friday, tomorrow. He's also going to be showing at the Chapel Gallery in North Battleford, and I was director of galleries there for the city of North Battleford, and we were just talking about the Chapel Gallery and what a challenge that's going to be for him to set up there, because it's a huge old church is what it is, right? And so Zach has some ideas about installation here, and also in how he's thinking in general about his drawings and installing his drawings, and so he'll tell us a little bit about that. But he's, in fact, he's shown really all over the world. He's going to be opening up the Mediamatic Fabrique in Amsterdam this year. And I think you've been there before, have you? Or
no, not the first time. No, it's a show that's touring. It was originally in Vienna, and now it's moved to so it's a part of a group show.
Other shows were done at the Open Studio, and I was a little confused about this because it's called Vienna Art Week, but an Open Studio in Toronto?
No, the Open Studio was in Vienna.
Okay, so that's me. Okay, good. Also at the Pristine Gallery in Monterrey, Mexico. He recently in October did some artist talks in Banff at ACAD. And there, ACAD, you had a show at the Illingsworth Kerr Gallery through Wayne Burwalt curated that show. And also, I guess he got together a residency for you at ACAD, where you worked on ceramics, a new ceramic piece that I hope we'll see a picture of. The list goes on and on and on. There's a new catalog that's come out on you that published in London. Yes? No.
Published here.
I need a lot of help. Thank you.
Published here in Canada. Yeah.
But why did I think that it was London then? I've got it here, London.
Okay. Cool.
That's you've got Edward Lucy Smith is. He's a British art historian, so that's what
he wrote the essay, the opening essay in the catalog.
I'm not going to go on. I'm going to let Zach take this, but I'll just end with a few things here. He has on one website, he's quoted as saying, often in large scale, I paint and draw my own body as the subject exclusively. That's no longer true. That's right. So you're moving into some new things here that you're going to show us. And also, I'll just plant a little seed before I step down and hand the talking stick over to you. It seemed to me that what's very interesting to me about the work of yours that I've seen is how much skill and technique is involved. And over the course, of the 20th century and even before that, there was a kind of a separation of art from craft that I think we're perhaps not so anxious about anymore. And artists like you are sort of bringing traditional, conventional artistic techniques back into their practice, and that's very interesting. So that may provide some seeds for questions.
Cool.
So Zachary, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming today. It's my pleasure to be back. I actually haven't been on campus when school's been in for a very long time. I'm usually wandering around in the summertime, so I feel it's very strange, surreal, and I feel old.
You look good.
I just cut my hair. I just had very long hair, as you'll see in the next slide. I also just wanted to mention, attribute a lot of my my interest in skill and craft as well to my schooling here at UMS and to a lot of the faculty here that, push that and then at times, push back but was definitely a part of my formation was and my interest in craft. So this is the cover of a book that I found last year or maybe earlier this year at the bookstore. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold and a sore throat, of course. And it's a book that is an old vintage book, I think from the 50s or the 60s. And it was, I don't know who Ronald R. Hooper is, I'm assuming he's maybe an entomologist or something, but I just wanted to start off with this slide, and we'll kind of come back to the imagery, and basically what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of cataloging or learning, I'm hoping to learn by sight and name, the way that someone would go birding or bird watching. So kind of cataloging these butterflies. And Graham said something interesting about it would be interesting to see how many of these species still exist, because of course this is a very old publication. I think I got the last copy of it. So that is also another interesting layer to my images and to my current work and my interest in animals and plants. So we're going to back up to 2009. I didn't really want to show any of this work at all. I kind of wanted to start with images of the works where flora and fauna start to seep in. But this work was a bit of a seminal work in that I was doing a residency in Paris, and at the time I was working with a commercial gallery called Jean Rochdard, and he had paired up with another gallery in Paris, a very famous gallery called Emmanuel Perrotin. And Emmanuel Perrotin represents some very famous artists. And basically I was just invited to choose an artist for this exhibition to do a pair up with. So looking at the roster of artists and the artists who were willing to be involved, actually one of my favorite contemporary artists was among the bunch, and that was Sophie Calle. And so she was very strange though. She wanted to be involved, she wanted to do this, but she didn't want to meet me, and she didn't want me to have any sort of interaction with her. She just wanted me to choose a piece. She sent me an email. It was very secret. I didn't have her email address. It was through the gallery. And I had to choose out of 5 images, 1 image. So I found this image very captivating, and it was from an older series of works that I'd never seen before, from the late 70s. And it was called From the Marian Pieces. So it's a Marian sculpture, and it's a kind of a close-up detail of a very small sculpture. I unfortunately don't have a better slide of her piece. This was just an installation from the show. And in it, the face of the Mary, it has jackal ears. It's a very peculiar sculpture. And it's cracked, so the face is kind of cracked in half. And it's tied together with elastic. And so in the email, she was very direct about what she wanted me to do. So, it was less a collaboration, more of like a project for me. And she said, I just want you, based on your practice and what you do, I just want you to respond very viscerally to the image that you choose. And so basically in previous works, I had, repeated, I do a lot of visual citation and visual quotation. So two separate things, I guess. Visual quotation, quoting, meaning I repeat poses from art historical images, kind of recreate and shift the meaning in relation to the male figure and how it's been historically represented, to try and give a sense of both intimacy and vulnerability, where there had previously been bravado and kind of, hyper masculine or hyper virile imagery. So to give it a more vulnerable view, I guess. So what I did was basically this is the first time I had ever used, just my body. So as opposed to, props. So the prop was my hair, and I just thought about that idea of, someone saying, keep your head together, and how would I do that? So basically I just pulled my hair down and I started posing with, imagining this crack in my head. And so I'm keeping my head together with my hair. And I kind of sat myself on this pedestal, I guess, to reference the idea of the sculpture, the object. And in a lot of ways, this made me think about what I was seeing and and the responses I was seeing to my work. Even down to just finding images of my drawings on, porn blogs, which can be interesting, but I also think it really shifts my meaning and my desire for, how I wish these to be viewed. I can't really control what people do on the internet or what people think about my work. But so anyway, this was kind of where that started to shift and where I started to really think about that, because of course I've been drawing myself over and over and over again and painting myself. And I wasn't necessarily bored with it, but I knew that I needed to do something to shift it. So at the time, the residency was actually not about this project. This was kind of a side thing that happened, but I had been working that whole summer just doing sketches, kind of, trying to think of the word. Basically just small, very detailed drawings of portions of much larger paintings in the Louvre, so in the Grand Hall of the Louvre. And basically what my project was to create an epic scaled painting back in my Saskatoon studio here afterwards. So it was to go and actually research, because I had gone previously in January of that year for an exhibition, and kind of struck me that this was the first time I was ever actually seeing these artworks, these neoclassical paintings that I'd been referencing in my work for years. And I thought, well, wouldn't it maybe benefit me to actually work from the paintings themselves? So I developed a project to go back, and I got a grant from the Saskatchewan Arts Board to do it. So that's why initially I was in Paris. So I did this massive painting that ended up being about 20 feet, 20 by 12 feet. And there were 12 of me, and basically I was echoing the gestures, and the repetition was all echoing the smaller drawings that I had done in Paris. So this was the next piece in that series. It's called Burqa, and so it has some obvious religious connotations. But again, I was starting to think about my identity and my face, and hiding my face, and I think that's where I started to kind of think about disappearing or disintegrating into what I wasn't sure at the time, but so fast forward to the next year, and I had been invited by Evergon, a Montreal-based photographer, of whom I met here in my master's program in the first year. He came and did studio visits, and we really hit it off, and we got along. And he's quite funny, and his work is, very, at the time, definitely very interesting to me, to my language, because he did a lot of large-scale self-portraits, nude. Anyway, he invited me to be a part of an exhibition called Domestic Queens, which is basically, artworks by artists who who live in domestic partnerships with other men, and basically how we were invited to develop the work however we wanted. But I was given a massive vitrine, which was about 30 feet, and it was kind of on the outside of the gallery. I've got a picture of it ahead. I'll show it to you in a few minutes. But so I had this massive space, and I knew that I wanted to do something very large, but also maybe something very intimate and personal to the relationship of myself and my husband, Ned. So I was in Tennessee while I was developing this work, and this is obviously where foliage and even just the broader theme of landscape in my work started to seep in. So I was being very much influenced by the landscape around me, which was very alien to me. It was, 100 degrees, 100% humidity, like it was insanely hot and just very, it was like cacophony, like the sound of the insects. The insects themselves were like the drag queen versions of the insects here, like they were just big and fluffy and colorful and incredible, and so the foliage as well. After being there a month, I wasn't homesick, but I started thinking about prairie landscapes. This is very hilly and mountainous and, full of this crazy vegetation. And I started thinking kind of, maybe in a more melancholic way about the landscape in Saskatchewan, and how and where I wanted to situate Ned and I together in a portrait, because I knew I wanted to do that. I have also been very interested for a long time, and so this is the full image, which is about 20 feet by 10 feet. And so basically what this ended up being was a fusion of of the insects and plants both in Tennessee and in Saskatchewan, because I did part of it there and part of it back in Saskatchewan. And that's where the idea of memory and recollection and thinking about building up landscapes in a very mimetic, very kind of detailed way, as opposed to a lot of the landscape artists that work in Saskatchewan traditionally have been, the work's been more minimalist, and it's been focused on the vastness of the sky as opposed to the vastness of the creatures and the plants. And I wanted to situate us, like a family, so with our cats, which we anthropomorphize. And so I'm also very interested in these images of, daguerreotypes and images of men together. And this is a very peculiar image. Obviously, the cat looks like a ghost, and so I've collected a lot of these images of daguerreotypes, and some of them with men together, and sometimes they're kissing, sometimes they're hugging, or they've got, they're holding hands or whatnot. And most of these men probably were not in homosexual relationships. They probably weren't gay, or maybe some of them were. But it was, the body language at the time, it was acceptable. It was appropriate to hold hands or to kiss. That ended with Oscar Wilde. That ended with the trial of Oscar Wilde in Victorian society, and it just,
so it was publicly acceptable for men to be intimate and close.
Yeah, I mean, the way it is, I think, probably still in a lot of Arab countries. There are a lot of, there are a lot of people who visit Arab countries, and the men, will hold hands, or they'll kiss the cheek, they'll whatever. Which is, so that kind of shift in body language. And so I kind of was interested in those images. Also, in relation to that break and when that stopped with Oscar Wilde. I will come back to Oscar Wilde as well. Yeah.
You had a really beautiful book you showed me once, Zach, that showed people in very ordinary jobs, like miners, farmers.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the name of that book was? Holding hands, or just having like kind of domestic photographs that were quite old.
But they were
turn of the century.
Yeah. I think it was called Dear Friends. Yeah, and David Dichter is the author. But I'll lend you the book. So that's,
It's interesting that kind of stops, that kind of intimacy between men and men in Britain, or an English-speaking country, because it's still very strong in France and Latin countries. So
sure.
You go to Russia, they're all holding hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about interactions even between you know, my uncles or the men that I grew up around, which is very British, very kind of, you know, there wasn't a lot of that kind of kissing, hugging, holding hands, or anything that may have existed. So you see a man, you know, like one of the images I have at home, I should have scanned it and brought it, but it's two men holding hands and they've got an umbrella, or their hands are interwoven. So they're very, very close to each other and they're just kind of walking down the street, but it's not something you would see. Or if you did, you would assume a homosexual relationship, not just homosociality. So that those things, those layers are really interesting to me. So that's kind of how I set up this space. But also I wanted the garden to be kind of this mythological, and it's a cull of all of these different images. So it's in a way a collage, which is the way I describe a lot of my my landscape work.
It's a real Garden of Eden, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, like a prelapsian maybe space. When it was installed, so the on the left was I just really like this installation image, and that was from, it was installed in Athens in a car garage, just in this very industrial site, and it was a really, really interesting juxtaposition or placement of this kind of pristine, you know, large-scale drawing, kind of just in the middle of this parking garage. But on the right, this is the vitrine at Concordia University, right outside of the FOFA. So connected to the FOFA, but really on the outside of the gallery. So flanking either side of the giant, the massive drawing, are two small portraits of the interiors of apartments. So we had just moved 3 times in a row, basically, because rents were being raised. And we wanted to stay downtown, but we didn't want to pay what Main Street, which has bought up most of the old character buildings that we like, owns them all and kind of jacked up the rent because we don't have rent control. Anyway, so I was feeling a little bit, a bit like a nomad anyway. So it made sense to have us in this kind of imaginary, or, you know, this Garden of Eden type space. With the, you know, with kind of the more, I guess, realistic portraits, the portraits of our homes. So at this time, I had been in contact with this mylar, and I had these blue pencils that I found around the same time. So, you know, I kind of look at these as blueprints, but they also kind of fulfill my interest as well in Delftware and in ceramics. So they're very small pieces that kind of flank either side, but, you know, they related to domesticity because they were small, because they looked like they could be ceramic, or so that kind of was the triptych, and the title of it was Vignette. And apartment 4B and apartment 15. And so from this work, I have kind of a major shift, and it kind of branched off into 2 different directions for a time. And a lot of it manifested itself in the blue mylar drawings, and then I actually started working in pastels. In the previous year, I had been to Paris, and I had seen this exhibition in the Musée d'Orsay, their full collection of their pastels. And there were some just incredible, massive, dynamic, like, just spectacular drawings in pastels. So like there was this one, and it was like the battle of the good and the evil angels, and it was like, you know, 25 feet long, and just really incredible. And I started to think about pastels again, because of course while I was in school, I didn't want to have anything to do with them. But I knew that at this point I wanted to work with color as well. So a cousin of mine had sent me a bunch of images from the Mariposa in Mexico, where these butterflies kind of migrate, and I just kind of instantly had this image of myself covered in the butterflies. So it kind of becomes a spectacle of nature, but also for me this piece is a bit about anxiety. And this is from a series called Disappearances, and it was a show I did in Paris in 2011. And overlapping with this series of works, I did another exhibition called Trauma and Other Stories, which opened around the same time in New York. So these are kind of 2 separate series of works that I'm doing at the same time. So these are some of the images, and of course my body is almost completely either immersed or covered, just with a hint of where I might be. So they're a lot more ominous. And again, that my interest in art historical citation. So it's kind of a recomposing of this Holbein image. And so I'm holding the same pose, and my head, I mean, you can kind of see the top of my head and my hand, and I'm holding a rose, although it's very difficult within the composition to see me. So. And so these works as well, these Midnight Garden series, which were kind of the precursor to the series that I'm working on now, or one of the series I'm working on now, which is the eunuch tapestries. These were also a response to seeing the Caravaggio exhibition at the National Gallery in 2011. And having seen maybe one or two, in different collections over the years, of course they were always very interesting to me, but seeing a whole exhibition of his work together with his contemporaries was really kind of mind-blowing. And you really get a sense of his work, of anyone's work, from seeing a whole exhibition as opposed to one or two pieces. And what struck me about the work when I saw it in person was no longer the figures bathed in light, but it was the backdrops and those kind of endless vacuums of blackness that just had little hints of foliage and animal in them. So that was kind of what interested me. I thought it was such an interesting shift for me because, of course, what I first became interested in Caravaggio for were the figures, those kind of like highly lighted figures that just kind of pop out off of the image. But for me, seeing this whole exhibition, I just found myself being drawn to the backgrounds and to the subtleties in the Grove space. And this work, this is Trauma and Other Stories. So I started thinking about drawings as well, less as just fixed to the wall and more as maybe installation. So kind of a very different process of working in drawing. So these are all blue mechanical pencil on Mylar. And this one, I was still kind of representing the body in a similar way that I had similar, but, resituating the body, less historical citation in the poses. So the one piece is called Go to Hell, the one on the left. And it's kind of installed away from the wall, so kind of like a waterfall. And then the other one is called Tower of Babel. So both kind of related to religious imagery and art, but kind of a re-evaluation of it and kind of a very personal rendition of these stories. And this whole show was about the idea of insult on the queer body and how it transforms a person. And this is also from the same series, and these are, I guess I call them the text drawings. So this is completely drawn with words, repeated. And I don't know if you can see, but the word for this is a drawing of me at 26 months. So it's just called 26 months. And the word is faggot. Just kind of over and over and over and over and over again. So again, that idea of words and transformation and seeing an image of a child and just the absurdity of calling a person a faggot, and that, I mean, there's a lot of things in here that I guess I was addressing, but and then this one, I did a series in red pencil, and for me, the red pencil was about correction, and this was all from a series of studio visits that I had with other artists and curators, and one of the things that a lot of them said was, your artwork's really gay. You don't want to be too gay. You don't want your artwork to be too gay. So this drawing is called "Don't Be Gay," and that's the phrase that's kind of repeated over and over and over and over again. So this was all from that same series of works, Trauma and Other Stories.
How big are these ones?
These ones are quite small. Like this one, well, this one is probably 25 by 40, so that one's a little larger. And then this one is 9 by 12.
When you
very
were
small.
yourself as a child, it's very different than the red pencil. It's very kind of faded out, it's like it's kind of bleached to some degree. Is that intentional?
No, I think it's just the material and also how it photographs. The red really, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, red's intense in a very different way.
But you could have gone darker with the blue as well. I mean, there's different choices there. It seems that when
This one
I
is-
look at this one, it talks about kind of about childhood fading as well.
Yeah,
So-
oh yeah, for sure, yeah. Well, yeah, and then these ones, of course, maybe, who knows, maybe there was something, you know, that idea of correction and the red pen and, you know.
I think too the sweater and the other one relates a lot to a photograph, whereas this one, you know, being just the head floating,
Yeah.
is quite interesting in contrast.
Yeah, this one has a lot more volume. It's a lot more three-dimensional.
So there's an install of that exhibition. And then I started working with a project space in Vienna, and I knew that I was going to be going there for it was about a month and a half to kind of develop a series of smaller drawings, again based on collections in Vienna. And so I was researching the collections and researching different kind of mythologies, and started thinking about, you know, outsider characters or a unified or universal man, but manifested in nature. So I came across a couple of mythological characters or men, kind of amalgamations, characters. One of them being the Green Man. And from, I think it's mostly in Britain, kind of a Brittonic mythological character, as well as the Wild Man, which is throughout continental Europe and Britain, and each country has their own kind of version of the Wild Man. So I guess these become more about manifestations of, you know, the fantastical in nature, a sort of like nature drag, if you will. And so they're you know, they're silhouettes of my body that are amalgamations of various plants and animals, and you know, they're kind of maybe a little bit more performative. And I'm also thinking, you know, about the crossovers between landscape and figure, and again, the idea of visual citations. So Arcimboldo, who there are many of his paintings in the Viennese collections. Actually, the collections in Vienna are just astounding. The Albertina has the largest collection of works on paper, and they have all of the Dürer watercolors. So here's just a couple of the images of the wild men that I was seeing. And this character just kind of emerged in the, you know, 14th, 15th century, and you know, historians aren't exactly sure where, you know, where he emerged from or how or why. A lot of times they're seen holding up the plaques or the shields of different families. So very wealthy families would have these paintings made, and the wild men would be holding their shields. And the Green Man. And while I was in Vienna, the project that I developed was to do studies again from the collections, and then kind of shift or resituate them, kind of including my body. So I never completely disappear. At one point I was the sole focus, but my body is still very much, or I am still very much a catalyst. So these were, drawn directly from the Albertina's collection. Although I found out halfway through doing this project that none of the works, none of these drawings, these kind of, the turf drawing, the fowl, any of these jurors, none of them are originals. You don't see the originals. They're in like airtight vaults, which is kind of gross. So I was like doing studies of facsimiles. But the Albertina does have a education center, and artists, if you're a visiting artist, you can bring in your passport and you can go and draw or just study original drawings. So, drawings and prints from their collection. There's certain ones that they will not, like of course I said, I want to see the Jura turf, and they're like, not friggin' likely. So there's certain things that you can't see. But I mean, I got to study from Jura woodcuts and stuff like that, like incredible experience, but not the watercolors. And so this was an installation from that project. So it was just kind of a small nook off the side of the rest of the gallery. And so this was another piece that I did while I was in Vienna, kind of resituating of figurative and landscape. It's called Cut Flowers. And part of the installation from the project in Vienna. And so these are some of the other things that I'm seeing while I'm in Vienna. So this was the Belvedere Castle, and then a section on the right is it's a small section from this beautiful gold sculptural work that's in the Habsburg collection. And so again, kind of shifting the idea of the wild man into the blue drawings. Again, they become a lot more kind of decorative, almost like cornucopia overflowing romanticism. And so these are all, they're not tiny, but they're not huge. They're about 25 by 45 inches. And these are blue pencil and nylon. And then we come to the eunuch tapestry series. So again, the idea of memory and recollection, and the figure, and that idea of a landscape. Before it's a landscape, it's a mindscape. And so these are all kind of amalgamations of plants and animals that I've researched and kind of brought together from different places at different times. And so they all end up being about my experience. And also one of the main references, again going back to citation, is the unicorn tapestries, which are either, a lot of them are in the Cluny, and the rest of them are all at the cloisters in New York. And they're very sad and very dark and very poignant pieces, and they're all kind of in one room, a very dark room. Of course, because tapestries have to be kept very dark. So they're very moody, and I became very interested in the idea of the character of the unicorn as this unique creature. And so in the works, in this series of works, I kind of become the character of the unicorn. And the narrative is a lot more ambiguous. I'm not really being chased by anything. I'm not really doing much. I'm just kind of crouching, or I think it was Jen Budney saw this, came into the studio and saw this, and she's like, oh, I thought this was like looked like a hookup scene down by the river. I said, well, it could be. Cruising, yeah. wasn't necessarily my intention, but I am not wearing pants, so. Liar. So in the series, the narrative is very strange, and there's this, all of these men, these huntsmen, and they're hunting this unicorn, and then finally they kill it, and then in the last panel, he's kind of brought back to life. So I think the historians have assumed that basically the unicorn is a Jesus character, or kind of the idea of the rebirth of Christ. And so again, there are amalgamations of different places, and one of the spaces that I'm very interested in, a kind of liminal site, kind of interest in ditches. So ditches on the sides of roads, or bluffs or thickets on the prairie landscape. So these are kind of a cross between ditches and bluffs or thickets, but with these biologically incorrect placement and biologically incorrect amalgamations of plants. So it becomes a space, like a magical space for me.
You're wearing an unusual hat in one.
In this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I used to have very long hair, and it was all up in a bun, and I was just wearing a toque.
Okay, I was wondering what that happened.
So yeah,
It
that's
looks like a historic hat, like a tam or
well,
something.
yeah. And I'm wearing it in in one of the earlier, the circular portrait that was in reference to the Holbein. I'm wearing the same hat.
It's interesting how realistic works look. It's kind of all based on other artworks to some degree.
Yes.
We don't see nature in that way with our eyes. It's been
Right.
very kind of fabricated and
Yeah.
kind of manufactured view of nature. Can you and you kind of deliberately kind of made a point of not letting people kind of think of them as kind of being naturalistic or kind of photorealistic. You
Well,
kind of created a nice enclosure for them there.
I kind of wanted them to straddle an in-between space, so that idea of a liminal space, and that's where I kind of have interest in the idea of a ditch. And ditches are often kind of forgotten spaces, but they line the roads. That there's a tremendous amount of space dedicated to ditches, but they are these kind of small or liminal areas, or margins. Rather, but I also, I guess, in coupling two different languages, the idea of the patterning of the tapestry, but also that the depth of the Baroque. So I want these to sort of undulate between being flat and having some depth to create a magical space.
You're very restrained in your use of color. You're kind of working almost monochromatically, and you're just kind of few notes, and you're kind of working mainly to a very tonally limited one. I think that kind of, for me, kind of gives them kind of a feel of melancholy, kind of a feeling of being very kind of aged and maybe a little bit out of this world.
That's kind of that's definitely something that interests me and that I want to develop in this work. Also, the idea of nighttime and how your vision at night kind of flattens out too.
Right.
And also Audubon, or some sort of like almost diagrammatic
Sure.
charts or something like that that's very careful, I suppose.
Yeah, there's almost kind of a scientific rigor in terms of the depiction of the kind of plant life that's kind of going on. It's mixing a lot of metaphors here.
Yes.
And getting the color, I mean, it's amazing how successful it is, but it's very restrained. I mean, it's just this amount of red, no more.
Yeah, well, and then there's I think maybe there's an image of this is one of my favorite details, just because of the only thing that's, I guess, not restrained in that whole image are probably those little blue drops.
Yeah.
So there's hints of or pop, I guess, but yeah, it is all very kind of flattened in a way, or diffused.
Yeah, the world where the lights are turned low, and I like the way you're kind of you're not copying tapestries. You're kind of representing them or rethinking them.
Yeah.
It's nice the way you're kind of. I mean, a lot of people would be more literal than you're being here, but you're kind of taking that kind of weave of kind of patterns and flat shapes, and you're making something new out of it. You're reinventing it in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of what, came out of the earlier work, the portrait of Ned and I, was that idea of, because they, one person described them in a review as, an expansive prairie landscape with a blank backdrop. And I was like, oh, that's so curious because, being from Saskatchewan, I just imagined that, in a grayscale, the sky would just be white, right? If there were no clouds in it. So it just manifested to me as sky. But it seemed very flat to another person's eyes. So it's all about perspective too, because this person, maybe was seeing that as flat because, not necessarily because there weren't clouds, but maybe because there wasn't a lot of undulation in the landscape. So again, I also am very interested in specific plants. And this one is called Unit Tapestry 2 Datura. So Datura is a plant that I've planted over the past couple of years and become very fascinated with, and it's just kind of, it appears in a lot of my works. This was a piece that I did during a residency in Vienna, and it was supposed to be for an exhibition there, and it didn't end up being shown, so I haven't actually shown it to anyone yet, or shown it publicly. So this is my garden.
Can you say a bit about your medium and your process? Like, are you actually projecting, say, that photograph at the bottom or
No.
on top?
No, it's all just basically what I do is I cover the whole surface or most of the surface towards the bottom. At the bottom, it's usually I either leave it without any pastel, but I cover the whole surface with black pastel, and then I just I go over top with pigment, and then I kind of blend. And it's a very, very physical process because I think a lot of times when people work with pastel, and it's something I did previously with working with pastels, I try to be very kind of precious with it, but you have to really grind it in there to get it to stay. And even the surface has to be, like layers upon layers. And then it gets to a certain point where you just can't put any more on, it just falls off, it just won't stay on.
And you prefer to blacken the paper yourself as opposed to you start with black paper?
I work on black paper, and then I put, so the paper is black, and then I cover the whole surface as a ground with black. And then I work over top of that and blend a lot, do a lot of blending. And then at the bottom, usually I'll cover the surface with with either a gray or like a beige, and then I fill in just at the very bottom where the gravel or the ditch part is, so that it becomes the extreme foreground, and the rest is almost like patterning. And so this is a recent installation from the IKG, where you are right now.
They told me you've just been there.
And so this is Unit Tapestry 3. And this one it wasn't initially going to go on the wall, and I left a bunch of the rest of so this is about 10 feet high, 10 by 13 feet. And I installed it just last week in North Bay, and it's actually kind of coming off the wall, so it has like a shelving apparatus. I don't know, I don't have an example of the top, but this is it at the bottom. So the room itself is quite small, and so we had to put 2 of the panels on an angle, and it really gives the idea of the tapestry. It really kind of feels more physical that way. And I think the next works that I do in this series, I'm going to think about building an apparatus and maybe having the drawing in the middle of a room and really have it as an installation as opposed to. So that's kind of where I'm moving, and I think a lot of that's been informed by the ceramic work that I've been doing. So this is an example from the Unicorn Tapestries of the fountain that I developed over a 2-year period through ACAD. So Wayne Barwald had come into my studio, and he expressed an interest in working with me. And he saw these small ceramic pieces that I'd hidden away. He kind of rooted through my stuff. And I'm glad he did now, because I kept them hidden. I didn't really want, I wasn't ready to show them to anyone, but he found them anyway, and he suggested that I do a residency through the ceramics department and develop something. So at the time I wasn't sure I wanted to do a fountain. I was just doing these little plaques, floral plaques. And I started thinking about the things that I'd been seeing. This is Oscar Wilde's grave, and I'll come back to this contextually. But so this kind of monument, which has now been apparently cleaned. So this is all lipstick kisses. So these are his mourners who have come to kiss his grave. In 2011, his great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren decided that this was a travesty, and they cleaned it and covered it with glass, which is disgusting. It's very strange. And so next time I go to Paris and put lipstick on, I'm going to kiss the glass.
Absolutely, that's right.
And so this was one of the kind of monumental pieces I saw in one of the parks on the right in Vienna. And Vienna was very kind of influential, the monuments to death and decay, but not necessarily in a negative way. So I started working on the idea of some sort of monument, and it ended up becoming a fountain. So I love the drizzle in this sculpture, which is so concrete, but yet it just looks like it's eroding. Well, it is eroding, but it looks like it's drooping, like it's alive in a way. And so I did so the base is there, and you can kind of see bits of the base in the final installation, but it's covered with, I think there's exactly 112 loose flowers, and that kind of relates back to Oscar Wilde, the amount of years that he's passed away. So this is going back to images from Vienna. This was just outside my apartment. So these are all over the place. And then on the left, it's an image of, as you walk into Stephansdom, which is the big cathedral, the city cathedral, you can put your hand on this spot. And so that's been there for like 1,000 years. That's 1,000 years of hands touching that. So that kind of tactile, it's just incredible, the thought of that. And so these were all loose flowers that I glued to the top of the fountain. This is Maria Theresia's tomb in the crypts in Vienna. Another tomb of an empress. And so here it is installed at the IKG across from the large tapestry. And so as it related to the tapestry, or the unicorn tapestries, the one with the fountain in it. But I kind of think of this, I wanted it to be almost like brittle bone matter in color, and in a way has a similar, for me, has a similar space to the drawings. It's very compact, it's recessive and flat. It's almost in a way like a drawing, and I formed it similarly to the way I do my drawings, so completely by hand. So there were no pores or molds or anything. This is everything has been sculpted by my hand, which was very important in relation to the way I work with the drawings. So I kind of consider this a landscape as well. And these are some other recent works.
So the pieces then get fired? Sorry, do the pieces then get fired individually and then you glue it together? Is that how?
Yeah, so the top is all glued together. So all of those little bits are glued together, but everything around the base is loose. So none of those flowers are and then so anytime I install it, I put away each little flower individually. But what I'm going to do for future installations is I'm just going to continue to work and build up more flowers. So there'll be, hopefully hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and they'll just kind of overflow.
Is it about 4 feet high?
Yeah, it's I think it's 3 by 3 by 5. Yeah.
It's interesting.
And it could have water in it, but I decided not to have water in it. Sorry.
It's interesting that with your later landscapes, and this too to some degree, landscape is not something that's kind of knowable. Like in your first one where you kind of Ned and yourself, you know, you were kind of looking over kind of a horizon, you were kind of in control of that particular space. But when the later work, the landscape becomes something that you can't kind of penetrate. It's kind of unknowable, it's uncontrollable, it's in control.
Mhm.
And there's a whole argument about Canadian landscaping of the Acoustra syndrome. And
The
the Acoustra syndrome.
Okay.
And it's the idea that when USA was kind of colonized, the idea was that they were the Puritans and they kind of got these wonderful Hudson River paintings and they're kind of overlooking the horizon. It's something they control, it's something they're going to dominate. Where Canada tended to be settled more along the Romantic period. And of course what this romanticism was that kind of fear, that kind of being overwhelmed by nature, that it's kind of uncontrollable, it can get you. You don't want to go into it, it has prophetic fallacy. And it's interesting, you start off with, in a sense, a kind of a prayer sensibility in your work, kind of a clear fluctuation between figure and breath. And all of a sudden it becomes this dense, unpenetratable environment that is kind of full of kind of mystery, implied threat. And even though it's beautiful, it's kind of beauty that can kind of kill you. Have you thought about that shift in your work? It's definitely there.
I hadn't really thought about it in that way. I mean, I guess with these works, the real kind of tie to place for me was in the idea of the ditch, so the very foreground. And then it kind of becomes almost like pattern backdrop.
But I think like the ditch if you're 2 inches tall.
Yes, they're a ditch in which I started to think about them as in you're so close to it, you're part of it, but you're not, I guess, yeah. And I thought about doing simply flat on the ground drawings of ditches, so that they could just be viewed overhead, or you know, from on top. So you would be standing on them, but you'd be looking at them
Which
on
puts
the
you
ground.
in a dominant situation as
Exactly.
opposed to a situation
Where you're more
overwhelmed or,
Yes.
or not in
Yeah.
control.
Yeah. So that's an interesting comment, though. I hadn't really thought about it.
It seems to be really tied to that whole Northern Romantic tradition, and maybe it's because you kind of picked that up in you know, Austria and Vienna.
Sure,
That whole
yeah.
kind of dramatic attitude towards the landscape. But it's really intriguing. It's making some very strong work.
Thank you. So similar kind of works that I've been doing. Again, this kind of maybe relates back to some earlier work about the idea of being covered. I was invited last January to go back to Vienna to do a residency in their museums quarter as part of a project that a Serbian curator who had done a publication called Faceless. He was invited to do this through a Serbian magazine, art magazine. And so he curated this exhibition in print, and he put some of my earlier works where I'm covering my face with my hair. And so he invited me back to do this project, which is opening tomorrow at the MediaMac that Marcus, you had mentioned earlier. So that's the exhibition. But he wanted me to do something, you know, that related to facelessness, or that kind of covering of the face, but within my newer works. So he didn't want to just put the hair drawings into the actual physical exhibition. And he was able to invite 12 artists, each for 1 month of 2013, to attend a residency in Vienna. So he invited me back, and these were some of the works that I did. So I called these the Vanitas series.
Do you have the butterfly house in Vienna?
Yes, spectacular. Yeah, there's a beautiful butterfly house in Vienna. And it's just behind the Albertina. It's pretty magical. And so then going back to, these are kind of very recent works in which I'm, I guess, more interactive with the animals. So in these works, they're actually feeding me. And maybe I'll do a series where I feed animals. I don't know. And then this is Leshy, and Leshy is a mythological character from the Czech Republic, I think, around that area in Eastern Europe. And it's basically a mythological character who's a protector of the forest, and I thought I would try manifesting both plant and animal in my silhouetted works. So again, that's citation of Archimboldo. But, so these are very, very recent works, and this one I'm just working on right now in my studio. So, cool. Yeah, that's.
Wow.
So I don't know if anyone has any questions. It's getting a little.
The thematic reference for me in all of this work seems very evocative of, you know, historical figures that are hybrid creatures,
Mm-hmm.
right? And hybridity seems to be the driving kind of impetus here in a lot of these things. And it comes off as being, you know, they're actually very transgressive figures. The fact that they're mixed up, right? And so humans, you as a subject, you're mixed up with plants and animals. And that's a transgressive idea, and something that a lot of religions, certainly the Judeo-Christian tradition and Islam is very much, you know, opposed to, right? It's keeping things separate,
Yeah.
and that as a mark of civility, really, right?
Well, even the idea, a lot of the conversations about, you know, human and what is, I mean, a lot of this also came out about thinking about, you know, what is natural, what is unnatural, and that kind of false dichotomy, and, which is usually a theological debate without any, with a lot of ignorance toward science or toward even just the way in the habitation of the habits of animals, including human animals and other animals, not set apart, but like we're all animals and we all have, you know, social lives, and the way that people or what the human animal assumes about other animals, even in relation to sexuality, to homosexuality, and the fact that, you know, a lot of religious views are that homosexuality is unnatural,
Yeah.
and so all of this is kind of wrapped up in that idea of the embodiment in myself or of myself as these animals, as sort of like drag performance, I guess, or yeah, a kind of peacockery, or there are some peacock feathers in that. But no, all of those ideas about, and when you mention religion or, you know, religious views, those are kind of in my contemplations, of course, as I'm doing this work.
So one thing that comes to mind is that, and you've probably looked at them, is the Indian or Persian or Mughal manuscripts
Yes.
that have the elephants or the animals that were everybody's, you know, the figures of plants are kind of twisted in there.
Yes.
Have you ever been tempted to take a different form in
Yes. Well, I don't know that I have any. Well, there are a few in the show that we have. Ali and I are in a show together at Darrell Bell Gallery coming up. But there are some works that kind of they go out of being a silhouetted human form or my form, and maybe some of them kind of contain a human element or an element of my body, but are really in the. Yeah, let me see if there's one. I think there was one. Yeah, like for instance, the hand, I guess, is, you know, the kind of fusion. I mean, in some of these, there's no human form at all. In some of these later blue drawings, or there's, you know. Is that kind of what you were? Yeah, yeah. I mean, these are, I mean, obvious references to Archimboldo, and intentional, but also very, you know, in a way human-based, because it's all these other animals, but they're made up of a human form. So yeah, transforming it more, twisting it more is kind of a direction I want and will go.
It can also be understood from an ecological point of view.
Sure.
I mean, there's the religion, there's the transgressive, but it makes sense in kind of vision. I've been reading a lot of science fiction Sherry Tucker in specifically, and she's always putting forward these rules where there's not a separation of human, animal, and
Yeah,
kind of
and that is kind of, yeah, that this surreal space that I want these, or that I imagine these in. Like I said, there is no, I don't really separate. So, I mean, there's separation. There's different animals have. I mean, a lot of it's even just my, you know, my thinking and my experience of being around my cats. You know, that their language, the way they speak with their bodies, the way they speak with their eyes. Allie knows this.
Completely changes a person, that's for sure.
It does.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Zach.
That's great. Is he just as in the character? Yeah, he's a character in a movie. Okay, that's why I recognize.
I had to go into all of my clothes from my drawer to find it because it had like somehow gotten wrapped in another shirt. I was like, oh, no, I'm seeing it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was so
yeah.
bad.
Hello, how are you? When I came, sorry to run out to the class.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm gonna Wikipedia Google
It's not true. It's actually the next time. When I did my first there.